Hi, my name's Dave Flynn, and thanks for watching my bass collection. And today we're taking a look at part 3 of my look at the Roland GR77B Bass Synthesizer. Now, in part 1 and 2, we've already sort of looked at a little bit of the history of the Roland guitar and bass synths, and we've had a look at the G77 controller. That goes along with this unit, and we've talked about some of the issues that plagued the controller itself. And as we kind of discovered, as a bass, it wasn't that very good at all. And as a synth controller, it probably was exactly the same. It was dogged with a lot of issues. Having a look at this part though, we're going to look at the G77B floor unit itself. Now, as I've kind of said previously, the G77B is based around Roland's JX3 and JX8P synth modules. Now, if you go back to the early 80s, the JX3P and the JX8P were considered to be the most powerful analog synths of its time, and certainly were the flagships of Roland for that period. And even by today's standards, they are still considered to be quite powerful analog synths, and you would probably be paying big money just to get those kind of sounds that would come out of this unit. But as you'll kind of see, and as I kind of alluded from my last episode, if you're a bit of a Sheldon Cooper, then you'll probably really get off on the floor unit, because the only word that can really describe this unit is complex. And just to put it in a bit of context, and going by Roland's own specifications, 47 parameter changes for each patch. I'll let you just sort of comprehend that in your sort of mind a bit, but 47 parameter changes per patch. And essentially you can't just do 1 or 2 parameter changes, you have to almost go through all 47 of them to make a tone change. Just to put that into context, that doesn't make sound sound creation fun. That makes it a nightmare. But enough of me rambling, let's get into it. We'll have a look at it and we'll talk a bit more about it in detail. So let's start at the front of the unit and have a look at the patch bay. Now, this patch bay is quite extensive, and it's in its day was quite extensive, and even by today's standards is quite big. And you probably wouldn't see all of these features on even some modern multi-effects units. But you can have a look here, and you can see here there are two balanced outputs, two balanced XLR outputs. Next to it is a I suppose it's a DB pad, rather the same thing you have on a DI box. So this actually has a low, medium, and high. I'm not sure how much it sort of cuts or boosts the signal. Normally you have this in medium, which is kind of sort of the middle of that. If you've got a particularly hot signal, and that's normally the case, particularly if going into a PA system, you could bring that back to you could cut that down. If you needed to boost the signal, which I've never seen that happen, you could actually put that into high. You've also got unbalanced outputs here. These are stereo unbalanced, 1/4 inch. Now that's actually stereo, but you also got mono out on one side, which is particularly that's typical of any unit, any sort of stereo effects unit that you'd have today. And that's particularly what I would tend to use, that one just going straight into my amp. My bass amp. You've also got here a guitar out. So the idea being is that you could use these outputs to go into, say, a PA system or a stereo keyboard or some keyboard amp or something like that. This guitar then would go straight out to your bass rig. And you could separate the signal even further, and that's a good solution. Here are a couple of control pedals that you can plug in here, or these are the inputs for those. So you've got pitch and you've got VCF as well. So that gives you a bit more sort of play with your sound. I've seen it used with guitarists, not so much with the bass, and I think that's just because of the way we tend to use it. Also, you have here the first of the protection switches. And there are a myriad of protection things on this because there are 47 separate parameter changes. Yes, the unit is very anal about you about you overwriting any patch that you have, and quite rightly so, because it takes a long time, such a long time for you to develop your own sound. Overwriting it is the last thing you want to do accidentally. So on here you can see you've got off is in the center, so it's very hard for you to just to sort of to overwrite straight away. You've also got MIDI here as well. Hang on, I'll just move that camera along a little bit. That gives us a bit of a, oh, there we go. So you have MIDI here as well. So this is MIDI out. Now, I think I said in one of my previous episodes that this kind of belies the sort of political thing that went along around about MIDI at the time, even though it had been agreed that MIDI would sort of become the universal standard for all sort of MIDI solutions, and particularly amongst Yamaha, Korg, Roland, and some of those bigger guys. You can kind of get from this that Roland wasn't particularly keen about other controllers accessing its keyboard sounds or its MIDI, its synth sounds. Happy for its units to access other people's, but it wasn't particularly keen about other people controlling it. So it only has a MIDI out. Now there are retrofits, and I've seen people who have added MIDI in and MIDI through to this as well. So it can be done, and I think on the very last of these units they actually included MIDI in as well. Now this is the spot for the PG1 or the programmer. Now I've talked about the PG1 in my previous episode, but basically because of the complexity of this unit, Roland had developed a separate control box called the PG1, which was basically just all the dial switches and faders that you would normally have on an analog synth. And basically that gave more context into creating your sounds, and it would have been an easier way to have developed your sounds, an easier way to play around with it, certainly a faster way. Without it, you're doing it straight with you having to do it with the controller connected and doing it that way, and that's where the complexity tends to occur. This PG1 was, I think, as I mentioned previously, was sold separately at quite a high cost when you bought the unit. Because of the complexity of it, I think Roland and a lot of dealers had worked out that it was better to sell the whole thing together, and that happened towards the end, and so you could pick it up in a bundle. But at the time, it was an expensive piece of kit, very hard to get these days as well, or hard to find, I think, because if you've got them, you don't want to let it go. The final two things. Here is the where the guitar or the controller gets plugged into the to the unit, and as I showed you on my episode with the GR77, it uses a 24-pin SCSI cable. There's the SCSI cable. I showed you that on the other one, but there's the other end of it, so it would plug directly into there. And that's basically controlling the controller and the synth and everything. The other thing which is quite significant, and I suppose to talk about, is this, which is the memory cartridge. Now, thinking at the time, this is kind of around the time when PCs were kind of very new, and the only external kind of way of storage was floppy disks and those sorts of things. Roland had actually developed this cartridge for outporting your sounds. So you could create your sounds and you could port them out onto a cartridge, which was a great idea of saving your sounds. And it was also an external memory for all of that. Now I'll go into it a bit more, but this has 64 patches, 32 are factory preset, 32 user. So you could actually export onto this cartridge an additional 32 user presets. So that's that was kind of a very useful feature and was probably very innovative at the time. And I still don't know. I mean, other than the fact that these days most things you can plug into a laptop these days and access your sounds like that. It was kind of the forerunner to all of that kind of thing. And of course, the last couple of things there obviously are which I've spin it around, are the power and the switch, off and on switch, if that's kind of an interest to you. But that's the patch bay and the front of it. So let's move along to the top. So let's come back to the top of the unit, and this is the top of the GR77B. And you can see that the controls are fairly simplistic, in fact, considering how complicated the unit actually is. Now, as I said at the beginning, it's 64 patches over 8 banks. So 32 of those are factory presets, 32 are user presets. So the user presets are banks 1 to 4. The factory presets are banks 5 to 8. Now, when you first turn it on, you'll see that it comes up, and here we're in 5, bank 5, patch 1. Now, if you've read anything that sort of says that that's an error, or there's something wrong with the unit when you turn it on and it comes up like that, that's incorrect. It will always come up at the factory presets over the user presets. So we'll always come up with at 5.1. And that's okay. So all of that is just coming up at the factory presets, and you can't overwrite those presets. If you have a look at the controls, and I go over to the right control over here, this is basically the end part of it. And after you've edited a patch and you've pressed the unprotect switch on the front of the unit, you'd come over here to the right. And if this was working correctly, I could, if I wanted to go to patch 5 or bank 5, I would just go bank 5, patch 1, and if I just press 5, you can see an error comes up because I've done that incorrectly. But that's the way it works. Underneath that, I should say, but that's also, it's interesting that right control is as far away from the edit controls as it can be, again, so you don't accidentally overwrite a patch. If you have a look here at the next controls, this is the copy control, and this relates to the memory cartridge on the front of the unit as well. So I had a memory cartridge plugged in there. I could hit this cart pedal, and it would bring up those patches. Now I can, if there was a cartridge in the unit, I could import and export with those 2 buttons. So that's all that relates to. Come across a bit further, you can see here it has actually got a tuner of sorts built into it. Now, if I hit that, you can see it comes up A440. Now, this tuner, by today's comparisons, would be like I suppose it's more like a tuning note. Would be like the little tuning fork note that you find in smaller Roland cube amplifiers, particularly the guitar amplifiers. Essentially, what happens is, if I had the controller plugged into this unit and plugged into an amplifier, I could now, in this mode, I could play any of the 4 strings, E, A, D, G, and B, and when I pluck the string underneath that, it would produce a MIDI note an octave higher. So it basically just gives me a note that I can tune to, rather like tuning to a piano or something like that, I guess. You can change the tuning from 440 to whatever you want, really, out of that. But this kind of obviously relies on the fact that the MIDI itself is tuned to 440. If I drop out of that and we come to these hold controls, this hold pedal controls basically relate to this hold pedal. Now, these functions I'm going to talk about are all programmable into the patches. So this is the hold pedal, and if you have a look here, you've got unlatch and latch. Now, in the unlatch mode, if I put my foot on this hold pedal and hold it, it will just sustain the MIDI sound until I let it go. Doesn't have any effect on the bass notes themselves, but just the MIDI sound. If I let it go, the MIDI sound will stop. In latched mode, this pedal will work slightly different. So I can put my foot on it, hold it, and it will just hold the note until I come back. So I can actually walk away, and the thing will just sustain for as long as it wants to. And then when I come back, I can let it go, and it will stop. Now again, that relates to the MIDI voice, not the bass tone itself. So in that hold mode, the bass sound will just, the bass string will just resonate till it drops out, but the MIDI sound will still hold. And it's effective. It's an effective tool, and I like using that particularly at the beginning of songs and those kind of things where you're holding a pad sound or something like that. Come across a bit further, this is the string mode. So this relates to the strings. Now there's 1, 2, 3, 4 strings for bass. If you've got the guitar, so if you've got the GR700, then you'd have 6 of these. But there's only 1 lit up here at the moment, and I'm not sure why that's in the factory preset, but if I highlight those, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. And at 1, 2, 3, 4, that's all 4 strings now are showing as active. Here you have a voice, you have hold and voice. Now, these 2 modes are also programmable into a patch. Now, the hold means basically I can just program which strings I want the hold pedal to affect. So if I wanted, say, if I want just the A and the E and the A strings to hold, but I don't want the D and the G strings, I can take them off, and when I press the hold button again, it will only hold these notes until I let it go. I can still play these other strings at the same time, and the voice will still, the MIDI voice, the synth voice, will still be on all 4 strings, but will only be holding on these 2. If we go to the voice mode, this basically dictates which strings will have the MIDI voice on it. So again, I might want the MIDI voice only on the D and the G strings, but I don't want it to play on the E and the A string because that's where I want to play most of my bass notes, and I don't want anything underneath that. So I can do that as well, and that's programmable into the patch. And as you can see, it's separate, so between those 2. I'll just highlight them again so you can see. So that really is that part of it. If we come up here, this is just relates to the pitch bend pad on the controller itself. So you can pitch up or pitch down. That's all that relates to. And then here are the edit controls here. And you basically have the MIDI, which basically you can determine the MIDI channel, but that's pretty much automatic. And really only relates if you're using this unit with, say, if you're using this unit to control another unit, but it pretty much is automatic anyway. You also have a trigger level. This level, it basically dictates the sensitivity of the trigger from the MIDI on the string. So at the moment it's at 50%. For a lot of things you'd probably have that trigger level quite higher, but it really depends on how sensitive. So at this level I'd have to push a little bit harder on the string to get the note to sound, the MIDI note to sound, that is. And then the other part of it is you have the parameter setting. So this is the edit setting. So when I first put it on, it comes with the cutoff filter mode, and basically this now relies on the controller plugged in. And so if I was to use the controller functions, the buttons on the controller or the knobs on the controller, it would start changing this. Okay, so that gives you a bit of an idea of what the functions are. Let's just have a look at the programming part of it now, and have a look at that. And this is where the complexity of the whole thing starts to come into play.